Yes Minister is a satirical British sitcom written by Sir Antony J. and Jonathan Lynn that was first transmitted by BBC Television between 1980 and 1984, split over 3 7-episode series. The sequel, Yes, Prime Minister, ran from 1986 to 1988. In total there were 39 episodes, of which all but 2 lasted half an hour. Several episodes were adapted for BBC Radio, and a stage play was produced in 2010, the latter leading to a new television series on UKTV Gold in 2013, set principally in the private office of a British cabinet minister in the fictional Department of Administrative Affairs in Whitehall. Yes Minister follows the ministerial career of the arty-hon Jim Hacker MP, played by Paul Eddington. His various struggles to formulate and enact legislation or effect departmental changes are opposed by the British civil service. In particular his permanent secretary, Sir Humphrey Appleby, played by Sir Nigel Hawthorne, his principal private secretary Bernard Woolley, played by Derek Fowles, is usually caught between the two. The sequel, Yes, Prime Minister, continued with the same cast and followed the events of the premiership of Jim Hacker after his unexpected elevation to number 10 upon the resignation of the previous Prime Minister. The series received a number of awards, including several BAFTAs, and in 2004 was voted 6th in the Britain's Best Sitcom poll. It was the favourite television programme of the then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Margaret Thatcher. Situation. The series opens in the wake of a general election in which the incumbent government has been defeated by the opposition party, to which Jim Hacker MP belongs. His party affiliation is never stated, and his party emblem is clearly neither Conservative nor Labour. The Prime Minister offers Hacker the position of Minister of Administrative Affairs, which he accepts. Hacker goes to his department and meets his permanent secretary, Humphrey Appleby, and his principal private secretary, Bernard Woolley. While Appleby is outwardly deferential towards the new minister, he is prepared to defend the status quo at all costs. Woolley is sympathetic towards Hacker, but as Appleby reminds him, his civil servant superiors will have much to say about the course of his future career. While ministers do not usually stay long in one department, many of the episodes revolve around proposals backed by Hacker but frustrated by Appleby, and others revolve around proposals promoted by the latter but rejected by Hacker, which Appleby attempts by all means necessary to persuade Hacker to accept. They do occasionally join forces in order to achieve a common goal, such as preventing the closure of the department or dealing with a diplomatic incident. As the series revolves around the inner workings of central government, most of the scenes take place in private locations, such as offices and exclusive members' clubs. Lynn says that there was not a single scene set in the House of Commons because government does not take place in the House of Commons. Some politics and much theatre takes place there. Government happens in private. As in all public performances, the real work is done in rehearsal, behind closed doors. Then the public and the House are shown what the government wishes them to see. Quote, However, the episode, The Compassionate Society, does feature an audio recording of yesterday in Parliament in which Hacker speaks in the House of Commons, and other episodes include scenes in the Foreign Secretary's House of Commons office and a committee room. At the time of the making of the series, television cameras were not allowed in the House of Commons and had only recently been introduced into the House of Lords, so it was not unusual to a British audience to have no scenes from there. Character contrast. The different ideals and self-interested motives of the characters are frequently contrasted. Whilst Hacker occasionally approaches an issue from a sense of idealism and a desire to be seen to improve things, he ultimately sees his re-election and elevation to higher office as the key measures of his success. Accordingly, he must appear to the voters to be effective and responsive to the public will. To his party, he must act as a loyal and effective party member. Sir Humphrey, on the other hand, genuinely believes that the civil service, being politically impartial, has the most realistic idea of what good governance means, and therefore knows what is best for the country, a belief shared by his bureaucratic colleagues. Hacker sees the job of government as one of doing good, or more specifically reforming the country according to his own party's policies, which, more often than not, means the initiation of departmental reforms and economies, a reduction of the level of bureaucracy and reduction of staff numbers in the civil service. To do so, or to at least look as if he is doing so, is what he considers to be a vote winner. Conversely, Sir Humphrey sees his role as ensuring that politics is kept out of government as much as possible and that the status quo is upheld as a matter of principle. But with the status quo notably including the prestige, power and influence of the civil service, Sir Humphrey attempts to block any move that seeks either to prevent the further expansion of the civil service or to reduce the complexity of its bureaucracy. Much of the show's humor thus derives from the antagonism between cabinet ministers and the members of the British civil service. A typical episode centers on Hacker suggesting and pursuing a reform and Sir Humphrey's blocking of all Hacker's lines of approach. More often than not, Sir Humphrey prevents him from achieving his goal while mollifying Hacker with some positive publicity, or at least a means to cover up his failure. Occasionally, however, Hacker does get his way, often by thwarting other arrangements or deals that Sir Humphrey has been making behind the scenes elsewhere with other ministers or civil servants, or in the case of the episode, The Tangled Web, Hacker successfully blackmailing Sir Humphrey into taking his stance. Sir Humphrey occasionally resorts to tactics such as calling a policy courageous to remind Hacker to contemplate the view that a controversial policy will lose votes, whilst a courageous one will lose the election, and thus to hinder the implementation of a particular policy. Sir Humphrey, on the other hand, believed that from the civil service's perspective, it makes very little difference who the minister is. Initially, Bernard naively sees his job as the disinterested implementation of the minister's policies, but he gradually finds that this conflicts with his institutional duty to the department, and sometimes his own potential career development. Consequently, another recurring scenario is one where Bernard must walk the tightrope, that is, balance his two conflicting duties by resorting to elaborate verbosity so that he can avoid the appearance of being disloyal to one in favor of the other. For example, in The Skeleton in the Cupboard, he sees the importance of notifying Sir Humphrey that Hacker has left his office, while still assisting Hacker in his aims. Such is Bernard's success in performing this balancing act, that after the third series, following Sir Humphrey's promotion to Cabinet Secretary, when Hacker becomes Prime Minister, he requests that Bernard continue as his principal private secretary, reasserting the perception that he is a high flyer. Sir Humphrey's personal characteristics include his complicated sentences, his cynical views of government, and his snobbery and superciliousness. Hacker's attributes include occasional indecisiveness, and a tendency to launch into ludicrous Churchillian speeches. Bernard is prone to linguistic pedantry. All characters are able to switch to a completely opposite opinion in seconds when convenient. Supporting characters. The first series featured Frank Weisel, Hacker's political advisor. The first syllable of his surname is pronounced Wise, but Sir Humphrey and Bernard persistently call him Weasel. Weisel does not appear after the first series, following his acceptance of a position on a Quango tasked with investigating the appointment of other Quangos, the government's honors system, and Jobs for the Boys. The first series of Yes, Prime Minister introduced Dorothy Wainwright as a highly able special political advisor to the Prime Minister. Her experience and insight into many civil service tricks ensure a lasting mutual distrust between her and Sir Humphrey and provide an invaluable second opinion for Hacker. Sir Humphrey frequently annoys Dorothy by addressing her as "Dear Lady." Hacker's home life is shown occasionally throughout the series. His wife, Annie, is generally supportive, but is sometimes frustrated by the disruptions caused by her husband's political career and is at times somewhat cynical about her husband's politics. In one episode, his sociology student daughter, Lucy, becomes an environmental activist, campaigning against the department's intention to remove protected status from a wooded area believed to be inhabited by badgers. Sir Humphrey falsely assures her there have not been badgers in the woods for some years. Sir Humphrey often discusses matters with other permanent secretaries who appear similarly sardonic and jaded, and the cabinet secretary, Sir Arnold Robinson, an archetype of cynicism, haughtiness and conspiratorial expertise. The fairly counterintuitive view of government administration displayed by Sir Humphrey is completely taken for granted by the civil service. Almost all the episodes end with one of the characters saying, "Yes, Minister," or "Mais oui, Prime Minister," in a diplomatic incident which centered on negotiations with the President of France. Each episode of the former was more or less self-contained, but the first two episodes of Yes, Prime Minister had a loose story arc relating to Hacker's attempts to reform the United Kingdom's armed forces, while the second was mostly devoted to concluding storylines and character arcs that had been seen over the course of Yes, Minister. Politics. Lynn joined the Cambridge Union in his first year at the University of Cambridge because he thought that he might like to enter politics. All of the main debaters there, aged 20, were the most pompous, self-satisfied, self-important bunch of clowns that I've ever clapped eyes on. They were all behaving as if they were on the government front bench, and 20 years later they all were. Michael Howard, John Selwyn Gummer, Kenneth Clark. I thought at that point that the only way that I could ever contribute to politics is making fun of the politicians. The series, then, intended to satirize politics and government in general, rather than any specific party. The writers placed Hacker at the center of the political spectrum, and were careful to identify his party headquarters as Central House. The terms Labour and Conservative have scrupulously avoided throughout the series, favoring terms such as the party, or the government, and the opposition. In the first scene of the first episode, Open Government, Hacker is shown at the declaration of his constituency result wearing a white rosette, with other candidates sporting the red and blue rosettes associated with the two leading British parties. The one exception to this neutrality occurs very briefly in The National Education Service, when Sir Humphrey explains to Bernard how the policy of comprehensive education is retained through successive governments, using different arguments according to which party is in power. Even there, Humphrey does not reveal which party Jim Hacker represents. Despite this, the overall thrust was towards government reduction rather than expansion. The episode Jobs for the Boys, for example, rejected corporatism. Throughout the period of Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, the incumbent government of the United Kingdom was conservative, with the government led by Margaret Thatcher. In a 2004 documentary documentary. Armando Iannucci compared Yes Minister to George Orwell's 1984 in how it has influenced the public's view of the state. Although Lynn comments that the word spin has probably entered the political vocabulary since the series, Iannucci suggests that the show taught us how to unpick the verbal tricks that politicians think they can get away with in front of the cameras. The series depicted the media consciousness of politicians, reflecting the public relations training they undergo to help them deal with interviews and reading from auto-cue effectively. This is particularly evident in the episode The Ministerial Broadcast, in which Hacker is advised on the effects of his clothes and surroundings. The episode, A Conflict of Interest, humorously lampoons the various political stances of Britain's newspapers through the readers. Hacker, don't tell me about the press. I know exactly who reads the papers. The Daily Mirror is read by people who think they run the country. The Guardian is read by people who think they ought to run the country. The Times is read by people who actually do run the country. The Daily Mail is read by the wives of the people who run the country. The Financial Times is read by people who own the country. The Morning Star is read by people who think the country ought to be run by another country, and the Daily Telegraph is read by people who think it is. Sir Humphrey, Prime Minister. What about the people who read The Sun? Bernard, Sun readers don't care who runs the country, as long as she's got big tits. Adam Curtis, in his 3-part TV documentary The Trap, criticized the series as ideological propaganda for a political movement, and claimed that Yes Minister is indicative of a larger movement of criticism of government and bureaucracy, centered upon public choice economics. Jay himself supports this. The fallacy that public choice economics took on was the fallacy that government is working entirely for the benefit of the citizen, and this was reflected by showing that in the program. In Yes Minister, we showed that almost everything that the government has to decide is a conflict between two lots of private interest, that of the politicians and that of the civil servants trying to advance their own careers and improve their own lives. And that's why public choice economics, which explains why all this was going on, was at the root of almost every episode of Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. Inspirations. The writers were inspired by a variety of sources, including sources inside government, published material and contemporary news stories. The writers also met several leading senior civil servants under the auspices of the Royal Institute of Public Administration, a think tank for the public service sector, which led to the development of some plot lines. Some situations were conceived as fiction, but were later revealed to have real-life counterparts. The episode, The Compassionate Society, depicts a hospital with 500 administrative staff but no doctors, nurses or patients. Lynn recalls that, after inventing this absurdity, we discovered there were 6 such hospitals exactly as we had described them in our episode. In a program screened by the BBC in early 2004, paying tribute to the series, it was revealed that Jay and Lynn had drawn on information provided by 2 insiders from the governments of Harold Wilson and James Callaghan, namely Marcia Williams and Bernard Donahue. The published diaries of Richard Crossman also provided inspiration. In particular, the first of these described his battles with the Dame, his permanent secretary, the formidable Baroness Sharp, first woman in Britain to hold the position. The episode entitled The Moral Dimension, in which Hacker and his staff engage in the scheme of secretly consuming alcohol on a trade mission to the fictional Islamic State of Qumran, was based on a real incident that took place in Pakistan involving Callaghan and Donahue, the latter of whom informed Jay and Lynn about the incident. Jay says that, "I can't tell you where, I can't tell you when, and I can't tell you who was involved. All I can tell you is that we knew that it had actually happened. That's why it was so funny. We couldn't think up things as funny as the real things that had happened. Media historian Andrew Crystal suggests that the show was enriched by the viewer's suspicion that what they were watching was unhealthily close to real life. Fusing inspiration and invention, Lynn and Jay worked on the story for anything from 3 days to 2 weeks, and only took 4 mornings to write all the dialogue. After we wrote the episode, we would show it to some secret sources, always including somebody who was an expert on the subject in question. They would usually give us extra information which, because it was true, was usually funnier than anything we might have thought up. Designers Valerie Warrender and Gloria Clayton were given access to the cabinet rooms and the state drawing rooms. For security purposes, the arrangements of the rooms were altered, and the views from the windows were never shown, to conceal the layout of the buildings. Main characters: Jim Hacker, the RT Hon, the Lord Hacker of Islington, KG, PC, BSc, was the editor of a newspaper, Reform, before entering government. He apparently spent a good deal of time in Parliament on the opposition benches before his party won the general election. In Yes Minister, he is the Minister for Administrative Affairs and a cabinet minister, and in Yes Prime Minister, he becomes the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Hacker received his degree from the London School of Economics, for which he is often derided by the Oxford-educated Sir Humphrey. His early character is that of a gung-ho, but naive politician, bringing sweeping changes to his department. Before long, Hacker begins to notice that civil service tactics are preventing his plan changes being put into practice. As he learns, he becomes more sly and cynical, using some of the civil service resources himself. While Sir Humphrey initially held all the aces, Hacker now and again plays a trump card of his own. Throughout Yes Minister, Hacker, at his worst, is portrayed as a publicity-seeking bungler who is incapable of making a firm decision. He is prone to make potentially embarrassing blunders, and is a frequent target of criticism from the press and stern lectures from the chief whip. However, he is also shown to be relatively politically savvy, and he slowly becomes more aware of Sir Humphrey's real agenda. In Yes Prime Minister, Hacker becomes more statesmanlike. He practices more grandiose speeches, dreams up his grand design, and hones his diplomatic skills. Nearly all of these efforts land him in trouble. In a Radio Times interview to promote Yes Prime Minister, Paul Eddington stated, "He's beginning to find his feet as a man of power, and he's begun to confound those who thought they'd be able to manipulate him out of hand." Sir Humphrey Appleby, GCB, KBE, MVOMA, serves throughout the series as permanent secretary under his minister, Jim Hacker, at the Department of Administrative Affairs. He is appointed cabinet secretary just as Hacker's party enters a leadership crisis, and is instrumental in Hacker's elevation to prime minister. He is committed to maintaining the status quo for the country in general and for the civil service in particular. Sir Humphrey is a master of obfuscation and manipulation, baffling his opponents with long-winded technical jargon and circumlocutions, strategically appointing allies to supposedly impartial boards, and setting up interdepartmental committees to smother his ministers' proposals in red tape. However, although presenting an outward appearance of supreme confidence and competence, Sir Humphrey is not immune to making miscalculations or outright blunders. When such blunders occur, he relies on the civil service bureaucracy to save him. In Britain's best sitcom, Stephen Fry comments that, "We love the idea of the coherence and articulacy of Sir Humphrey. It's one of the things you look forward to in an episode of Yes Minister. When's the big speech going to happen? And can I see if he's reading it from an idiot board? He's really learned it, and it's superb." Derek Fowles posited to a concerned Eddington that these speeches were the reason why Hawthorne won a BAFTA for Best Comedy Performance 4 times in a row, while Eddington, though nominated, did not win at all. Loquacious and verbose, he frequently uses both his mastery of the English language and his grasp of Latin and Greek grammar both to perplex his political master and to obscure the relevant issues. In a Radio Times interview to promote the second series of Yes, Prime Minister, producer Sidney Lotterby stated that he always tried to give Eddington and Hawthorne extra time to rehearse, as the scenes invariably featured lengthy dialogue exchanges. Bernard Woolley. Sir Bernard Woolley, GCB/MA, is Jim Hacker's principal private secretary. His loyalties are often split between his minister and his civil service boss, Sir Humphrey. While he is theoretically responsible to Hacker personally, it is Sir Humphrey who writes his performance reviews and influences his civil service career. He usually handles these situations well, and maintains his reputation in the civil service as a high flyer as opposed to a low flyer supported by occasional gusts of wind. Woolley is always quick to point out the physical impossibilities of Sir Humphrey's or Hacker's mixed metaphors, with almost obsessive pedantry. He can occasionally appear rather childlike by making animal noises and gestures or by acting out how such an analogy cannot work, which sometimes annoys his minister. Woolley tends to side with Hacker when new policies are announced, because they seem radical or democratic, only for Sir Humphrey to point out the disadvantages to the status quo and the civil service in particular. To sway Bernard, Sir Humphrey uses phrases such as barbarism and the beginning of the end. At times when Sir Humphrey fails to get his way, Woolley can be seen smiling smugly at him over his defeat. In a 2004 retrospective, Armando Iannucci commented that Fowles had a difficult task because he had to spend most of his time saying nothing but looking interested in everyone else's total and utter guff, but his one line frequently had to be the funniest of the lot. Iannucci suggests that Woolley is essential to the structure of the show because both Hacker and Appleby confide in him, which means we get to find out what they're plotting next. The editor's note to the complete Yes Prime Minister thanks Sir Bernard Woolley GCB for his help and confirms that he did indeed make it to the position of head of the civil service.